My name is Quentin Humans, and I'm a second-year cardiology fellow at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. My talk today is entitled "Now is the Time: Harnessing the Moment to Support URM Trainees and Trainees who are underrepresented in medicine." I have nothing to disclose. So I'd like to start our discussion today by sharing a really personal story from when I was a medical student. I always knew I was interested in internal medicine and specifically in cardiology. In turn, I was elated during my third year of medical school when I began my internal medicine rotation. I had a keen interest in the patient-physician relationship and had heard about the collegiality among team members on the wards. As is the case for third year, I was paired with another third year medical student. Demographically, we were different, but both thirsty to learn. I, a Black male student from South Carolina, and she, a white woman student who we'll call Lucy today, interested clinically in anesthesia. From the start of the rotation, I could sense a difference in between treatment between me, the team, and my co-student, particularly for my senior resident. As we all know, the resident tends to set the tone for the team. On rounds, my co-student would get most of the attention, and in the team room, she would be handed the more interesting patients. I came to learn that Lucy and my senior resident were part of the same sorority in college. They shared inside jokes, and Lucy enjoyed a level of engagement that was incredible. Meanwhile, whenever I tried to ask questions about my patients, my senior resident would barely look up from her page of notes to acknowledge my presence. After the first week, and given my desire to do well on the clerkship, I asked my attending for feedback. She reported that I was doing well, but that a sense of a portion of my grade would come from the senior resident and the resident team. I should talk to her and get some feedback as well. I set up a time, and as we chatted, I explained why the rotation was important to me, what I thought was working well, and areas for improvement. I asked pointedly, with all of that, I'd love to know, how am I doing? And her response was telling. She said, well, Lucy's really smart, so, and that was it. That was her feedback. There were so many implications in that statement, not the least of which was the fact that the sentence was left dangling for me, left to my own devices to complete it. I was clearly being compared to my co-student, a comparison that from the beginning would place me at a disadvantage, given that I was who I was, and I was from where I was from. Also, if Lucy was, quote, really smart, what did that make me? With this knowledge in hand, how would the rest of the rotation go, and who might I turn to for help or guidance? Was this how internal medicine was in general? Was this how all of academic medicine would be? I want us to ponder that framing as we proceed with our discussion, because this was not an uncommon occurrence. Here are our learning objectives for today. We will discuss tools for recruitment of trainees who are underrepresented in medicine, or UIM, with a specific focus on changes that are underway in 2020. Next, we will explore ways in which bias can affect the training environment. And finally, I will offer a novel method that we have implemented at our institution to address issues in the learning environment through mentorship. So why is it important to have diversity within the training environment? Well, first, we know that healthcare disparities persist for many illnesses. We also recognize that in order for us to address these disparities, we need a diverse physician workforce. Studies have shown that time and again, physicians who are underrepresented in medicine are more likely to treat underserved, non-white patients and even non-English speaking patients. Importantly, too, we have a real moral obligation to ensure that medicine reflects our society, recognizing that for so many years, Black and Brown people were barred from medicine, unable to attend medical school, or more recently, not privileged with the wherewithal to climb the ladder towards careers in medicine. It is precisely because of these opportunities to address racialized healthcare disparities that we should focus on training the next generation of diverse physicians. It's important to note the shifting nomenclature within academic medicine as well, namely from URM to UIM or URIM, as you may see written as well. While URM was commonly used moniker to define specific populations, the AAMC has devised a more broader term, UIM, or underrepresented in medicine, to be more inclusive and timeless. It defines those who are underrepresented in medicine as those racial and ethnic populations that are underrepresented in the medical profession relative to the numbers in the general population. This change in definition occurred to reflect the fact that sociodemographics in medicine will continue to evolve and that those who are therefore considered UIM will change with them. So where are we today? Here is a demographic breakdown of applicants to US medical schools during the 2018-2019 application cycle. When it comes to recruitment, we must understand who our target populations are and where we are in regard to pool of applicants from which we can choose. As you can see, white applicants made up the majority, next Asian, and then URM groups made up decreasing proportions, with Latinx making up 10.6%, Black or African American 9.8%, and even smaller numbers for Native American populations. Extending beyond applicants to acceptances to medical school, we see that the acceptance rate for URM and specifically Black and African American applicants is lower, as shown here in this AAMC data. Shown another way, here is a table of medical school matriculation in 1997 and 2017. As we can see, the number of matriculating students at US allopathic and osteopathic medical schools who were from groups underrepresented in medicine increased by 30%. That sounds great, however, because of overall increase in matriculation in medical school increased by 54%. As we see here, the proportion of entering medical students who were from underrepresented groups actually decreased from 15 to 13%, suggesting that we are indeed going in the wrong direction when it comes to recruiting underrepresented students into medicine. As we shift from medical school to graduate medical education, we see that across the specialties, there is a dearth of URMs, particularly if we consider that nationally, Black people make up approximately 13% of the population and Latinx a little over 18%. These numbers represent an opportunity that should not be overlooked or ignored. So how do we begin to make headway? What are the admissions and recruitment practices that may help us bridge this gap? The AAMC has promoted holistic review in the admissions process as an imperative first step. In doing so, it challenges us to assess each applicant's background, experiences, attributes, and academic metrics. In addition, it directs us to use the distance traveled or how far a student has come in light of discrimination or a lack of resources to get where they are. A process of holistic review allows us to more broadly assess one's potential to contribute, even if he or she has not had the privilege of attaining those historical metrics. Experience, attributes, and academic metrics, all in concert. Thankfully, there is data to support this practice. Here, the AAMC studied the impact of holistic review on the diversity of class composition and found that schools with increasing elements of holistic review were able to improve the diversity of their incoming classes. 81% of schools using many elements of holistic review saw increases in the diversity of the class, showing the power of holistic review. Earlier this year, the Federation of State Medical Boards and National Board of Medical Examiners announced that the USMLE Step 1 would transition to pass-fail in the coming years. This plan change has brought the holistic review process into the forefront once again. In this piece with colleagues Dr. Utibe and Essien and Quinn Capers, we discuss why this change to pass-fail will be a game changer in a positive way for UIM students. Standardized testing, starting with the MCAT for entrance into medical school, gives advantages to those who are privileged and can afford access to preparatory courses. The costs alone can be prohibitive, but the fact that these tests represent gateways, either into medical school for the MCAT or into specialties for Step 1, serves to further perpetuate the admissions and achievement divides, especially considering that tests like Step 1 were never designed to be a gateway exam, as they are used today, and do not predict the merit of a physician. The impact of Step 1 scores goes beyond just the residency match as well. Lower scores can damage confidence during a critical period in medical education, just before starting clerkships, when imposter syndrome may be at its highest, and grades for clerkships have such a large subjective component. Imagine how a lower Step 1 score might have impacted my response when that senior resident during my third-year clerkship stung me with her microaggression. It may have further reinforced doubts in my competence or my abilities. And these thoughts, doubts, can be nagging and at times even self-fulfilling. Pass-fail for Step 1 will mitigate this because it places everyone at a level playing field and gives programs the opportunity to think outside the box about how to evaluate applicants. We ended our piece in the journal by saying, quote, ultimately, physicians' skill and quality are defined by the care they provide to patients over the span of a career, a value that no three-digit test can anticipate. And we firmly believe that. Circling back to my experience as a student more intentionally, in reflection, I had likely benefited from a holistic review. I had beaten the odds and gained admission to my dream medical school, but still, why was I made to feel like I wasn't enough? My senior resident, to be sure, likely did not harbor explicitly biased or racist thoughts, but her actions hurt nonetheless. For me, they represented a host of common occurrences for those who are UIM in medicine. A microaggression in that her attack was subtle and indirect. It caused a sense of stereotype threat. Was I indeed living up to a stereotype of poor performance, even though I felt that I was performing well? As the only Black medical student on the wards at the time, tokenism played a role. Maybe I was there because I was Black and only for that fact. Imposter syndrome struck like a somber drumbeat. Did I belong? Was my chosen specialty going to be right for me? And homophily. While my co-student and senior resident enjoyed a rich relationship reminiscing over their times in sorority, I was left as an outsider. And for my senior resident, her actions were likely an expression of implicit bias. So what is implicit bias? It is an unconscious preference for a specific social group that can have adverse consequences. One key for us to realize is that we all have them, and awareness is essential. This can be achieved through implicit association tests or IATs. For medical students, implicit bias has been shown to play a role both in recruitment and evaluations of performance, as was the case in my example, and can hinder students' progression and improvement. Ways to mitigate bias are myriad. Reflection can be a good first start. Recognizing that we all have implicit bias can ease some of the angst that can accompany it. Take a moment to consider interactions from the last week or month. Can you identify somewhere where your biases may have played a role? How might you approach that interaction differently if you could have done it over today? Next, individualizing rather than stereotyping, recognizing that each person with whom you come into contact is an individual and not representative of their broader racial or ethnic group. Perspective taking can open up a new world, helping us see lived experiences through another person's eyes. If someone appears to be struggling, why might that be so? How might their view of the world influence their behaviors? How can you better understand that view? And importantly, slow down. We know that these implicit biases exist so that we can make quick decisions to keep ourselves and our families safe. If we slow down, we can recognize and hopefully subvert them. Here's one practical way to employ some of these lessons. For the virtual interview process for residency and fellowship, one of our excellent medical students, Jeffrey Fuchs, and I identified evidence-based methods to help mitigate bias. As has been mentioned, one should encourage all admissions committee members and interviewers to understand their implicit biases by taking the implicit association test. Structured interviews with a standard rubric help prevent personal preferences and biases from affecting the interview environment. Multiple mini interviews dilute any would-be biased responses. Interestingly, blinding interviews to applicant cognitive data can also be effective. These last two, I think, are imperative because community is so important for those who are UIM. Encouraging exposure to those faculty and trainee members who are there. We need to see and hear from each other to learn about the environment. How will we fit in and what support systems are there? Lastly, work to diversify should not be stagnant. It has to be ever-changing and requires evaluation. Taking these steps can get programs on the road towards mitigating bias, particularly in 2020, in our era of virtual interviews. Now, while implicit bias must be grappled with, trainees are also dealing with explicit bias from staff and patients alike. Seeing the data on a bar graph or in tabulated form is compelling, but understanding the impact of these displays is even more important. As a resident physician, I had an impactful experience with patient bias. I was caring for a combative patient on the inpatient cardiology service. He had been admitted with a vague story of chest pain and had completed his workup without a cardiac cause for his chest pain discovered. He was ready for discharge, but had been verbally abusive to staff throughout his tumultuous hospitalization. Things were calm when my intern and I entered the room, but quickly escalated when we shared with him that he was ready for discharge. He started yelling and throwing his arms and hands about, exclaiming that he was not leaving the hospital by any means. As we turned to leave and call security, he screamed, "I'm not playing your fucking nigger games." I was astonished and disheartened. I scurried out of the room, but my heart was almost beating out of my chest. Thankfully, my program director, Dr. Ashish Didwani, was a paragon of support. The damage had been done, though. We wrote about the experience in the Annals of Internal Medicine. I ended the narrative piece sharing, quote, "In the ensuing months, we made a point of organizing a conference on the topic of explicit bias. Sharing my experiences with my residency colleagues was especially cathartic. The conference was called White Coats, Black Doctors. However, I knew that even if I did achieve the level of full professor, no coat would ever be white enough to overcome my Black skin in some patients' eyes," end quote. And that is the true toll of expressions of bias. They have an impact, not just on confidence, but on comfort. Responding to bias can be challenging, leading trainees or superiors to simply do nothing. Some of the challenges include balancing patient autonomy with ethical principles of justice and non-malfeasance. We as physicians frequently have a first do no harm mentality, specifically directed at patients. However, this should apply to clinicians and particularly trainees who are most vulnerable. There can be concerns that speaking out against bias can hinder the development of lasting relationships with patients. Others may perceive that they may be going out on a limb on their own if they speak up and so remain silent. Lastly, a fear that patient satisfaction scores may be through evaluations like likelihood to recommend may suffer as a result of speaking out. That can also be a challenge. Doctors Warsami and Hayes at the Mayo Clinic have laid out a simple and easy to follow method, which they have coined the SAFER model to respond to misconduct, of which patient bias is definitely a form. These can be steps that are taken either by the person on the receiving end of the bias remarks or, importantly, by an ally who may be in the room or nearby. The first step is to step in when you observe behavior that does not align with the institution's values. Dr. Didwani and my PD did this for me. He met with me and empathized with my experiences. Too often, as we discussed, we may hold back from stepping in, which can leave the trainee helpless and unsupported. Second, address the behavior directly, head on, with no equivocation. Third, focus on the values of the institution. And fourth, explain expectations that as an academic center, we will not tolerate this sort of behavior or these sorts of actions. And lastly, report the incident and document such that the institution can learn from and continue to support or improve its practices. So we've covered a lot of ground describing some of the concrete issues faced by UIM trainees. To include a broader list, here are some of the key challenges faced by medical students, residents, and fellows from the literature. For medical students, they face lack of support, discrimination and harassment, lack of cultural representation, and lower satisfaction with the learning environment. While I'm sure many of these themes carry on into graduate medical education, the specific issues that have been identified for residents and fellows are microaggressions and bias, pressure to be ambassadors for their race, and trouble with forming professional and personal identity. With so many related and seemingly insurmountable challenges, what is the best way to support our UIM trainees? While there's no panacea, I firmly believe that mentorship is a key and underutilized approach to support. Mentorship in academic medicine has so many benefits. It aids in professional development, career guidance, specialty selection, and research advancement. Participating in mentorship relationships is associated with improved job satisfaction for mentors. Importantly, near-peer mentorship has been shown to have a positive impact on trainee well-being. All of these things together led us to create our mentorship program, STRIVE, or the Student to Resident Institutional Vehicle for Excellence, which is a near-peer mentorship program model in which residents and fellows serve as UIM residents and fellows serve as mentors for UIM medical students. Inherent in the power of these, academic medical centers are very siloed. Medical students exist in the medical school, separate from the residents and the fellows who are primarily at the hospital or in the clinics. Seldom is there interaction to allow for professional identity formation and support. Peer mentorship is a bridge that can eliminate these silos. We felt it important that our mentorship program be resident-led with support from faculty members, but not with direct oversight over content. In this way, we were able to set the tone for and create an environment that is open and honest. We started the program in 2016 with me at the helm as an internal medicine resident. As the initiative has progressed, we built in a leadership structure that includes a Strive president and vice president who share responsibilities for building our content and building out the mentorship program. We build on sustainability by identifying 1 to 2 trainees each year who we bring into the leadership structure. Here's a process map that shares some of the nuts and bolts of how we go about engaging through our program. We first identify residents and fellows via self-report through our GME office and send an invitation at the beginning of each year describing the program and inviting their participation. This creates a pool of residents and fellows from which we can choose to participate in any given event. That's one of the things that works really well for our mentorship program, because instead of relying on that one-to-one mentorship model, which can be taxing for any one individual, it is a group mentorship model. Those residents and fellows who are willing and able to participate can come to events as their schedules allow. Next, we identify UIM students through invaluable help from the business coordinator at our Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Anita Munoz. We then have events scattered throughout the year. There are 3 pillars of programming that make up the backbone of Strive: curriculum review sessions with medical students, panel discussions, and social events. To provide some more detail about the pillars, we published an educational innovation in the Journal of Graduate Medical Education. For curriculum review sessions, we obtained medical school curriculum materials, including syllabi from students. Resident or fellow mentors sign up to review course material based on their content of interest and their area of expertise. For example, as an internal medicine resident interested in cardiology, I reviewed the pertinent cardiology information with first year students before the cardiovascular module. In this way, UIM students could see someone who looks like them in the years ahead, but also be prepared for their exams. Residents and fellows have an opportunity to hone their teaching skills while reviewing content in their chosen field. The second pillar, panel discussions, are important because they give students a glimpse into what it is like to be a resident or a fellow in a given subspecialty. Discussions include how to succeed in the clinical years of medical school, how to pick a specialty, and how to prepare for intern year. These discussions are so fun because there's no one else in the room. No one is being evaluated. People are honest and thoughtful about their experiences and can share what it's like to encounter challenges like bias and microaggressions and how they were able to overcome. This is a picture here just from one of our panel discussions. And when I look at this picture, I think about the wealth of different specialties that we tend to have. We have an emergency medicine physician, orthopedic surgery, OB-GYN, pulmonary and critical care. Having all of those perspectives is really important in helping to shape the experience in the Strive program. And lastly, it's important to note that we one of the pillars or the main pillars of our program is social events. They allow for camaraderie and sharing of shared experiences. We hold these events often off campus with food and music and really try to create a family atmosphere that carries beyond the events themselves. In the era of COVID-19, like so much of our lives, these events have gone virtual, but we hope to be back in person soon as the COVID vaccines become available. It was a focus for us to ensure broad representation from the different specialties in medicine to give the medical students the greatest opportunity for exposure. We successfully had representation from most of the major specialties, barring just about 2 or 3. We also had strong gender representation. Our racial and ethnic mix could be improved, particularly for Latinx and Native groups, but this is an area for improvement for us. We also had a range of postgraduate years, which has brought with it additional experience and expertise. We assessed attitudes of our resident mentors with a short survey. Most agreed that Strive made them a better mentor, helped them deal with the challenges of underrepresentation in medicine, that they had benefited professionally from participation in Strive, that the program helped strengthen their desire to enter academic medicine, and that they would have appreciated an equivalent program in their training. Our hope is that many of the attitudes continue, encouraging UIM residents to stay in academic medicine, to increase representation, and for more to take on mentorship roles, even in the future as faculty members. So that's the evidence of impact. But I think most powerful and most influential are the words of our trainees. I'd like to take just a moment to share a few quotes from our participant resident mentors. So one said, quote, "Strive is an outlet to discuss the unspoken rules and experiences of being minority in medicine." There's a lot of talk about the sort of hidden curriculum that happens in medicine. And Strive is one way to kind of help with that hidden curriculum and teach some of those hidden issues. Another resident mentor said, quote, "I have enjoyed getting to know medical students in Strive. They are excited to learn, they are very engaged, and they ask great questions. There were many challenges I had to navigate on my own as a medical student. I simply didn't know how some things worked, and I didn't know who to ask. It is so rewarding and almost therapeutic to be able to give advice to younger students so that they are prepared for the next stage. I feel like I'm making a meaningful difference in their lives and helping them go into residency with confidence." We all want to be teachers, and I think anyone who mentors another person recognizes that the mentor gets just as much out, if not more, than the mentee. And this provides an opportunity for our residents to do that. Lastly, from the resident perspective, quote, "Connected me with several colleagues I would not have met otherwise, which have had both immediate and long-lasting input on my career as a physician. Strive has reinforced the necessity of great mentorship and accountability for progressing our position as underrepresented minorities in medicine." Another great quote that shows just how important it is for us to look out for each other, for us to be there for each other. Now, we have not directly assessed the impact on medical students just yet because we wanted to retain the purity of the experience, but many shared sentiments similar to this quote from one of our excellent medical students. He shared, quote, "Finding Strive was one of the defining moments of my medical school career. Coming from a rural town in Brazil and then a smaller undergraduate institution here in the United States, I was equally excited and intimidated to be starting medical school at a highly prestigious large academic center as Northwestern. The mentors at Strive helped me feel like I belonged here and have supported me both academically and personally to help me reach my full potential. I'm forever grateful to each of the residents who took time from their busy schedules to help me navigate the overwhelming undertaking of going through medical school as an underrepresented minority student. I hope you understand the magnitude of the impact they had on my personal and professional life." And I think that, one of the keys there that he points out too is um, thinking about, the busy schedule of residents. And I think even though residents are busy, fellows are busy, it's something that, all of our residents are willing to give their time as long as they're available. And I think that's one of the beauties, again, of that really group mentorship model where residents, if they're free, if they're available, are able to give freely and to help our students succeed. In reply to an article in JAMA Internal Medicine earlier this year that discussed the prevalence of discrimination experienced by trainees in medicine, we sent this reply, highlighting the impact we believe of a program like Strive can have. We said that while identifying and addressing the sources of discrimination and bias will be paramount, creating spaces like the ones in the Strive program through a model of near-peer mentorship should be a consideration for academic centers moving forward. This is so that we may finally support our trainees and create the training environment that they deserve. Thank you so much for your attention today. To review, today we've discussed tools for UIM trainee recruitment in 2020. We've explored several ways that implicit and explicit bias can affect the training environment and some tidbits about what each of us can do moving forward to really take an important role in helping to mitigate that bias. And then we've defined the role of mentorship, specifically talking about our program, Strive at Northwestern Medicine. I have so many people to thank for their mentorship and sponsorship for this initiative. First, I'd like to thank all the trainees at Northwestern who make it a joy to come to work every day and to teach and learn. Thank you to my wife, who's been really a steadfast ear and confidant since the inception of the idea for Strive. Thank you to my mentor and sponsor, Dr. Diane Wayne, whose staunch support I've enjoyed throughout all of my training. Doctors Jennifer Idrisi and Ade Akatuem were the president and vice president for Strive after me, and they really were instrumental in ensuring that that sustainability existed. Dr. Anita Munoz at the Office of Diversity has really provided invaluable support to Strive. Dr. Kalila Gates was a very early supporter of Strive and helped us get the program off the ground. And finally, Dr. Ashish Didwania, our internal medicine program director, who was my direct boss during my chief year, and for his support during my inward experience, and really just for being a personal mentor for me. Thank you all for your attention, and I'm happy to take some questions.
So Quentin, thank you so much for your insights and your personal journey in this direction. I know there'll be a number of questions. I have one thing that I just wanted to ask you quickly is this really impressive program is fantastic and obviously having a huge impact. I guess my question would be, just from your perspective, are there ways to link this kind of near peer mentoring on the front end in some ways? Or is this part of, if people see that there are mentor groups, then more underrepresented in medicine people will feel that they can go? Or do you have thoughts about how we connect people who may be interested in medical school, but not yet applied for a variety of different reasons that you highlighted in the transition from medical school to residency?
Absolutely. Great question, Dr. Fallon. And so I think that a couple of things come to mind. One is that one of the things that Strive does is obviously on the day-to-day during the events, we give sort of helpful advice to students, and we're able to address some of their specific challenges. But the other thing it does, I think, is has an impact on the entire environment, because you can imagine as a student, if I get to the wards and I'm on my medicine rotation and I see internal medicine resident who I met at a Strive event, I'm looking around and no longer is it that I see nobody who looks like me or no one I know. It's I now have a confidant that I see around. And I think as that kind of culture change takes time, obviously, but as that changes, and as applicants come through and they're saying, hey, how is this program? How's the environment at your institution? It starts to have an impact where those who are UIM might say, there's a lot of support here. I can ask so many questions of the residents. I know exactly what I want to do or need to do as far as research in order to get into, let's say, orthopedic surgery. And so I think as that culture changes and that environment changes, it makes the program or the institution become even more inviting for students who might be applying. And then a really important point about how can we reach back and reach forward, because mentorship is important really across all the spectrum. So from faculty even to middle school, really, because we have to start to build the pipeline in order for us to affect change with the applicants. And so for Strive particularly, that's one of our sort of future missions as well, is to reach back into the undergrad level and have students who might be underrepresented who are interested in medicine. Because that's another important change that happens, is that some students might be pre-med, but then they get to their first orgo, or they get to a weeder course and they can't really imagine what their life is going to be like within medicine, and so they may fall off into engineering or some other rotation or some other career. And so if we can reach them early on and say, hey, we're doing some really cool stuff at the hospital, this is what your career could look like, I think that's a really important component. And so, it's important to stay focused with the residents. And I think that Strive is good at that with residents and fellows and medical students. But at the same time, we have to recognize that there's this broader issue, particularly when we think about the pipeline and how we can build in that pipeline.
Cheryl, Cheryl, I noticed you had a question in the chat. Do you want to bring that up? And then we'll go to Dean Reed, who raised his hand.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Humans, for being with us and for sharing your experience. We wanted you to come because we want to learn how to do something like this here. I was interested in the SAFER badge card or the SAFER framework and some of how you had implemented that, and wondered just how the participants in Strive or how they're involved in some of the institutional efforts to be able to change the environment, do more anti-racism education, and also to be able to increase allies, especially because we're sensitive to the fact of the burdens placed on UIM residents and students in serving in these different roles.
Absolutely. Thank you for those questions, Dr. O'Malley. So the first thing for the SAFER model, I think it's so helpful because it's really brief, but it
Could
really
you guys
gets.
Hear me?
Yeah,
can
we
you hear
heard
me?
you. Yeah, we heard
Oh,
you.
okay. Okay.
Can you?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Quentin. We got
Okay.
it.
So it's really brief and short, and it gives some really concrete recommendations. And in fact, after this experience and with Dr.
You're good.
Am I breaking up?
Yep. Yeah.
No, we've got you. Dr. O'Malley, I think it might be on your end.
Yeah, we're hearing it. We're hearing Quentin fine.
Go ahead.
So,
Continue.
okay. Yeah. So so actually after that experience and that with the inward, and obviously this happens very frequently or not uncommonly just in the setting of academic medicine, we have started to create a hospital-wide policy where that everyone can access so that they understand exactly what our institutional values are and how we can respond to patients who might might be showing bias. And so I think that was a good next step that has come out of it, and using that SAFER model as sort of a start and a framework has been helpful for us. The second question was, how do we utilize the Strive mentors to engage in broader anti-racism work and potentially even community work? And I think that's an important question. And one of the things that is really great about Strive is that once people say and email us and say, hey, I'm interested in being a mentor, that becomes a repository of residents and fellows who we know are interested in doing this type of work. And so we have frequently gone to Strive mentors to do other things within the community. One example comes to mind is we have a group called Chicago Check that brings high school students onto the hospital campus and teaches them different things like ultrasound and how to suture and that kind of thing. And we've had a relationship with them every summer when the high school students come onto campus. And it's been really great to just be able to tap into our Strive mentors and say, hey, this opportunity has come up. Would you be available to give your time? The last part that you made about minority tax, I think, is really important to touch on. Those who are underrepresented in medicine, the residents, the fellows, the students, they are going through a lot of, and we talked about just a couple of examples, but that's in addition to just trying to learn medicine, right? And trying to become a good doctor. And so I think it's important too, to make sure that it's clear that this is not an expectation, but an invitation to participate and to serve as mentor. And I think that you guys will find, like we have, that a lot of people are itching for this because, you know, as we go through our day to day, a lot of times things can become mundane, but this provides an opportunity to really help someone else. And I think that, you know, our mentors get a lot out of that. And so they are excited to participate when available.
Dr. Reed?
Yes, I wanted to congratulate Dr. Humans on a great talk and to say to you, I'm really amazed at the fact that you've already contributed to the medical literature in a way that helps move us forward, and that is really very impressive. So, two questions. One would be, how did you get into writing in a way that would contribute to medical literature, and advice that you may have for our trainees in this? And the second question is related to a challenge we face in Phoenix. We do not have a significant, very large African American population, and so when we try to recruit people here and show them that there are people that look like them, have common experiences, you know, can have a shared experience and things like that, we're challenged a little bit by that. So any thoughts about how we can do that better? So two questions for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Reed. The first question was about, you know, how did I get into writing, and particularly in academic writing. And, you know, it's one of the things that I've always loved, and I found very cathartic when I have an experience. You know, sometimes I'll come back and sit with my thoughts with them, but then I find that putting them on paper is really helpful for me to kind of go through my thought process. And I think, you know, for those trainees who might be listening, it is, you know, even if you're not even interested in publishing anything, I would definitely recommend that as you're reflecting on things that happen, to jot them down. And you might find that as you're thinking about them and writing about them, it helps you to kind of come to terms with sometimes, and even sort of kind of address some of the issues that might have come up in your experiences. It's something that I love to do, particularly in narrative writing, and increasingly in original research. And so, you know, I highly recommend students and trainees who might be interested. Please you guys will have my email address. Feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to chat with you more about sort of going through that process. The second question is a really challenging one, because I think a lot of academic centers deal with this as well, because it's kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost, that, you know, underrepresented minority trainees like to go to a place where there are other represented minority trainees, but you have to start somewhere. And so I think it's the first thing, I think the primary thing, the most important thing, is to make it clear that it is a priority for your institution and your program, because that's what you know, I'm looking for. I'll speak for myself when I'm, you know, looking around and considering at every step. I've always applied other places, and if people are talking about diversity, if people are have initiatives in place that are trying to address diversity, and not just in recruitment, but how the experience is at that given program, then that makes me excited. And the other thing is, I think that a lot of people will also look at, you know, I think in medicine, we look at challenges as opportunities as well. And so I think that, you know, trainees will think about that as well. And if you're focused on it and very specific and intentional about that, trainees will recognize that, and it'll be something that can start to build. But it's like anything else, it takes time. But you know, I can already tell that, you know, and I think a lot of programs are going through this, that the time will come. And I think that there's been a shift in the country really recognizing, particularly in the setting of COVID-19 and the healthcare disparities and everything that's happened with racial unrest in the country, that, you know, and that's why I titled the talk as "Now is the Time," because we have so much energy, we have so much veracity behind this. And I think that now it's time to do, and to make action.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Reed.
Dr. Glassberg had a comment as well.
Dr. Humans, I want to congratulate you in the cardiology field. A dear friend is Quinn Capers. And, you know, Quinn, yeah, we had Quinn speak at the American College of Chest Physicians, but I want to tell you about some efforts that I think are interesting, and, you know, what you've done in Strive is amazing, but we're also interested in the faculty piece, right? And how to improve and have faculty understand that diversity is a part of enjoying your job, right? And
Absolutely.
the piece of coaching versus mentoring, right? That the piece of this that I'm curious about, does Strive have a piece for coaching faculty, not just faculty as mentors, but coaching faculty? So at Arizona, Dean Reed and our Dean Lucio have worked on champions in diversity and really designating people to the task. And my feeling is that this is really a component of what every medical school must do, because you can't just focus, and obviously Dean Reed addressed the recruitment issues and all that. You can't just focus on the student if the student has a role model that hasn't been coached. So could you address what you're doing of coaching versus mentoring and how to guide us with your thoughts about this at our institution?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question, Dr. Glassberg. This is such an important point. And when I first started to write about these issues, one of the first things I wrote is with my wife, actually, a letter to the editor about how finding focus, supporting underrepresented trainees starts with faculty. And it's your exact point that we have to begin at the top, and that sets the tone. And that begins to set the environment before we can kind of trickle down and support others. So I completely agree with you. One of the things that we're doing at Northwestern is we started started by my wife, actually, who's a physician at Northwestern as well, the Minority Faculty Association. And it's a way for all minority faculty to have a home base. But within that, to your exact point, there have to be professional development elements, and not just we're all getting together and it should be a safe space for all faculty members, but also a focus to your point about mentorship. So there's one thing about mentorship and sponsorship where you're kind of moving up the ladder and what's the next move that I should make in my career and that kind of thing. But then specifically coaching, like to your point, what are some of the specific issues or elements that I can focus on? And here I'm here right now with a given element. Let's use rounding as an example, but then I want to go to this next step. And so who can serve as coaches? And I think it starts with building the structure, and then the second thing is identifying a leader or a host of leaders, because again, we'll come back to that minority tax, and it's tough for it to just be one person. So a leader or a host of leaders who can then identify, okay, what are the elements that we should work on? Within academic medicine, who's in the research lane, and how can we identify people who are going to help a faculty member get a grant, who are going to help a faculty member towards their goal of 5 publications, are going to help a faculty member climb up the ladder from assistant professor or associate professor to professor. Because again, even in faculty, we could use these same graphs that we use in the applicants and admissions to faculty members and whether or not they achieve professorship. And so it's such a broad issue, but it is something that it requires everyone too. And I think that's another important point to bring up is, I think we like to take, those who are underrepresented like to take a lot of agency in what they can become, but then also it requires so many allies. And Dr. Fallon, mentioned this at the beginning of the talk, is it requires everyone to kind of shift their focus and recognize that this is an important issue that we all need to focus on.
Yeah, I think Quinn has done a remarkable job at a national and now international level. And it was his new position at UT, I think, is going to be very pivotal, right? But I think the national cardiology organizations and the pulmonary organizations, I can tell you, are very much on top of this. And some of that is because of the drive to get underrepresented minorities and women but also to create this coaching pathways that we feel will really trickle down, right? And develop, really intensive summer programs that coach the faculty as well as recruit the students, and
Absolutely.
run them in tandem, right? You run them in tandem so that you make the introductions simultaneously, right?
Exactly.
So you create almost this seamless way, in a sense, to create personalized education across the board. So once again, I love the efforts of the cardiologists in Northwestern. I hope the pulmonary and U of A will do as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Other questions? Emily, anything else in the chat that I've missed?
Dr. Raymond, I'm loving all of the faculty engagement in the question and answer portion. I am excited also to hear about any resident and medical student and fellow interest as well. But Dr. Raymond has a wonderful question too about expanding on pipeline programs, basically for high school, pre-med college programs. If you have just a minute or two to share with us, that'd be great.
Absolutely. The pipeline is just as important as any of these issues that we've been discussing. And I think that, pipeline, first of all, can start early. So one of the things that we have done at Northwestern is we spent some time at a middle school, actually, and had students just go through like chest x-rays and EKGs, just any little bit of exposure can really open their eyes to so many different possibilities. And I think the other thing about pipeline and exposure is I don't consider it a failure really if you start a pipeline program and a certain number of those students don't do medicine, because you might have sparked their interest just in any kind of a professional realm, and that they might not have otherwise known that they could do. And so I think that those efforts are really important. I think, just like as we've been discussing, having a structure, I think, at the top to help to organize these efforts is important, because we shouldn't have to ask any individual, any one trainee or any one faculty member to do it all, because that's how burnout happens, and that's how we won't actually achieve what we're hoping to. But if the structure is there, if we have everyone who's on the team participating in pipeline programs, then I think they can definitely help. We have this Westinghouse at Northwestern that we have a relationship with, and we always bring them to a big panel discussion in December, and then they have some exposure to different specialties. All of these things help, and they start to give us a larger pool that we can work with from the beginning, from undergrad to medical school to residency, so that hopefully, at the end, we have those faculty members who we retain in academic medicine. Because that's the other thing is, okay, we have UIM students and residents who go through and then they end up going into private practice, which is fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But, if we want to start to build from the top, we have to find ways to make people feel supported as faculty members. And so all of these all these discussions, I think, will help with that.